My name is Idris Watts, originally from Kent, Maidstone. You probably can tell by the accent. And when I was 18, I moved to Leeds to study Islamic studies at Leeds University in 1998. And then I became a Muslim studying Arabic studies in Leeds, my first year of studying. And then in my second year I moved to Morocco because as part of our degree we had to do a year abroad. So I studied my year abroad in Fez in Morocco, and when I was there I fell in love with the place, and as soon as I graduated I moved out there studying Islam on the side and teaching English as a profession out there for about 6 to 7 years. I was out there. And then I came back when I was 29, so between the ages of 18 to 29, I was back and forth in Morocco, coming back and forth between England and Morocco. And then I came back to England, and for the last 11 years, I've been teaching children and adult education in Islamic institutes and universities. And also in the last probably 3 to 4 years focusing on teaching a course called Connecting to the Quran, which is a 1-year Quranic Arabic course online and within Yorkshire and Lancashire. I teach that, and in the day doing counselling and therapy. And I'm currently on a 3-year training. My last year I'm starting next month. Based in somatic experiencing, the modality is called, which is a body-based therapy, which I will explain a bit about today nearer the end of the talk. And I studied with people, I don't know if people are familiar with him, Hakeem Archuleta. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him. He's an American convert from the 70s, from California. He was in the heart of the hippie movement, the counterculture movement in the States. And then he became Muslim in the late 60s, and then he moved to England, studied homeopathy, and then he moved to Pakistan and studied traditional, naturopathy, is that what you call it? Naturopathic medicine, like a traditional Hakim. And then he went back to America and he studied body-based therapies with Alexander Lowen and Peter Levine, and he is based in New Mexico now. So I studied with him long distance via the internet. So that's a bit of background about myself, and today we are going to look at Islam and mental health. Yeah, that's a slide I've got there, which is quite apt. We did not plan this, but it happens to be Global or World Mental Health Day, isn't it, today? And so it seems very apt to speak about this. And what I'm going to explore today is, which is becoming a more prevalent topic, is Islamic psychology and what's conducive to Islam when it comes to psychology and psychotherapy. And I said, in the last few years, I'd say in the last 5 years, it's really started building up, and there's many Muslims now sort of coming together to discuss this area and to see how can we integrate especially the current developments that have really come out in the late 90s and early 2000s up to today in neuroscience, and how do we understand them in the light of our tradition as Muslims. So the first slide, if you just move on to the next one there, is Hakeem Archuleta.
Is this United Nations?
You're in the wrong place.
Sorry.
No problem. Hakeem Archuleta, he mentioned this term, which is actually a condition that someone can suffer from, which they call simultanagnosia, which is the inability to perceive more than a single object at a time and integrate the components of a scene. I.e., we become so focused and fragmented in our attention that we can't integrate our full experience. And that is one of the main areas of where people really struggle with mental health, is when they cannot integrate their experience into their sort of understanding of who they are and who the world is and how they interact with it. And this is really what would I say? It's a real problem of our time. And one of the questions that's regularly raised, especially from traditional cultures, especially coming from Muslim culture, is why do we need psychology? Why do we need these psychotherapeutic practices when we have our tradition? Our elders, and throughout time, did we have this? Well, first of all, I ask this question, which is when we actually look at the Islamic tradition, throughout history there was therapeutic practices, and one of the most famous books that came out to highlight this was a book that was by Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, if people are familiar with it. There's a Muslim sister, what's her name, in the States, through Khalil Center, who's got a talk on this. If you go to Khalil Center, she does a presentation on this on this specific book. But what I try to pose to people here is this question, is that when we look at the people of pre-modern era, many things that they did unconsciously and didn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it or exerting themselves in it, because it was actually part of their daily life. Whilst today, we can't take it for granted. It requires a lot of effort and a lot of finance as well to bring it into our life. What are those things? Let's look at, for example, diet. People of the past, they never really had to worry about what they put in their mouths. Most of the food that they ate daily was healthy, organic, and and it didn't damage them. Look at today. To eat healthy, you have to spend more money on it. You have to put more struggle in even obtaining it, because so much of the food that we consume today is actually bad for us. And so, yes, people of the past, they didn't worry about food. Whilst today we have to be concerned about it. We have to be conscious about what we eat. We have to exert more effort in obtaining healthy food and food that's going to serve us and be good for our systems. And we have to spend a lot of money on it as well, whilst people of the past didn't have to do that. Another example I give is exercise. People of the pre-modern era, they didn't have to worry about exercise. The thought of going to a gym and running on a conveyor belt in order to keep healthy and maintain their health would be insane, because just to do their daily chores required them to use their bodies and exert themselves, from working the fields, just to go get their water. Sometimes they'd have to walk miles just to get water. They were using their bodies daily without even thinking about it. Whilst today, I'm sure many of you can relate to this, is that it's a struggle just to get off our backsides and off our computer screens. And a lot of what our daily interactions don't require us to use our bodies. And so we have to go to the gym, and we have to spend a lot of effort to keep our bodies in good shape. And even now, to this point, the new phenomenon of we have to even count our footsteps and make sure we get our, how many steps? 10,000, is it? 10,000, we have to count my 10,000 steps. And you think that's insane. And it is insane, but it's also required for us to actually maintain a level of good health. Another area, people of the past, probably, it was natural for them to connect to one another and to relate their problems with one another and share, and in their human interactions. Whilst today you have to pay a professional and sit with him to get a quality. Literally, I laugh with my clients and say, you literally have to pay me to have a quality conversation with someone, because everyone's so obsessed and so, which I call one of the biggest problems of our time, is I have to be productive. Productivity is actually killing us and sucking our souls out, because we always feel we're not real, we're not human unless we're doing. We've moved from becoming human beings to become human doings. And this is killing us. And people are feeling disconnected from themselves, and we're so out of sync with our human nature that we feel anxiety just being in a normal social setting. And like one of my clients actually reported this to me today. she said to me, she says, when I'm at school, I'm fine, I've got to focus. When I'm in a social setting, I'm fine as long as I've got a target, I've got to get people to do something. I'm absolutely fine. She says, I have a nearly nervous breakdown where I've just got to interact with people and just like, how are you doing? What's up? She says, I literally don't know how to function. And this is our inability to touch into our human side and connect, which is so, it's part of our makeup is to be able to do that. So we live in a very alienating and very inhumane society, really, from that perspective. And so, in order, I believe, we have this Islamic term, don't we, jihad, which is struggle and striving. I believe the major jihad of today is to hold on to our humanity and just keep sane, is a struggle. And this is our fundamental priority today, so that we can keep stable in a society that's moving at such a fast pace and is taking us away from our natural way of doing things. So mental health, a lot of mental health is about the ability to be able to integrate your experience, that experience of how you relate to yourself and how you relate to the world and how you relate to others. And this simultanagnosia is where we become fragmented and only can see one perspective, or we hone in, and we see this manifest in this crazy polarity that we have in the society today, where people are caught in their little echo chambers and they can't seem to empathize and connect and understand and communicate to people that they may differ with, and they see any sort of difference, any sort of thing that opposes their way as a threat to themselves. And this is unhealthy, because human beings are gonna differ, and we have to learn to live with one another and be able to tolerate things that are not necessarily comfortable to us. And this is where mental health is so important for us to solve the problems in the world today. We have to be doing it from a very balanced and regulated place. I can't have a conversation with you if I don't feel regulated in myself. As soon as I start to feel dysregulated and threatened, all discourse goes out the window. It's impossible for you to have a conversation, because now it becomes a fight in order for me to hold my ground or assert myself, and that you can't have fruitful conversations from that place. So mental health is, and being able to regulate yourself, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, is fundamental for us to progress. So, what's Islam got to say about mental health? There's a beautiful hadith here, which is a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, where he said, if you're going to ask God for something, then you should ask him for al-afiyah. And in this hadith he says, the companions, the students of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, came to him, and they'd ask him questions and say, if I'm going to ask God for something, what should it be? And he says, you should ask for afwa wal-afiyah. And in Arabic this is beautiful, because both these words come from the same root, which is all Semitic languages like Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, they go back to three-letter roots. So kitab, what's kitab mean? A book, people familiar with that, and it comes from a three-letter root, which is kaf, ta, ba. Okay, and the afiyah and the afwa and the afu come from a three-letter root, which is ain, fa, waw. And the essential meaning of this word is about being something cut off but growing, which is interesting, because afu in Arabic, which I've translated as amnesty here, means that God forgives you, i.e. he severs the repercussions. Someone deserves, they should, like, you've done something naughty, and then your parent comes up to you and they should ground you or should do whatever they're going to do, but they say, no, I'm going to let you off. That's afu. You deserve the repercussions, some sort of repercussions, but God lets you off. That's afu. And the afiyah, well-being, is that as if you're cut off from something that's detrimental so that you can grow. And so we translate the term afiyah usually as well-being. And so it's about the part, and from a mental health perspective, we can look at it as the past doesn't hold you, have a grip on you, and you're able to grow and move on from them. Or illness, you're able to heal from your illness, cut yourself off from your illness, and grow into something more healthy. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he said, if you're going to ask for something, ask for those two things: pardoning or amnesty and well-being. And then he says something very beautiful in this tradition. He says, because people have not been given anything better after certainty, which in Arabic is yaqeen. And certainty here is, we can look at it as certainty in faith. I am certain that God is in my life. I'm certain of my principles. Anything after faith, the best thing you can have after certainty is well-being. Now, why is certainty so important? Because the human being requires absolutes in their life. They have to have something that they can cling on. I learnt this when I was teaching children in the after, we call it madrasa, after school, Islamic school. I used to, when I first started teaching them prayer and how to perform their ablutions, their wudu, I'd teach them like I studied. I'd say, well, this thing is necessary, this thing is recommended, this thing is, disliked. These are the things you should be aware of. And the kid looked at me in the eyes and says, do I have to do it or not do it? And this is very important. And then I realised the wisdom of the uncles and the aunties, of where they taught us our Islam. What was it? That's you don't do, that you have to do. And children at a certain stage in their development, they have to have absolutes. As their development as they grow in their development, then they're able to appreciate nuances. That life is not black and white, and there are certain nuances and subtleties. But at some stage in their development, they have to have absolutes in order for them to feel safe. And I do believe, it's a theory, that a lot of the anxieties that our youth are suffering from today is because we don't have absolutes. Everything's up for question. And people need some sort of stability, some anchors, as we call them, that they can hold on to and be certain of. And so the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he's alluding to this point, is that certainty is a fundamental in life of things. Certain principles you need to hold on to in life. But if you don't have well-being, your certainty will break. It will start to crumble. I.e., say, this is a typical situation, someone feels dysregulated in themselves, they're suffering from anxiety, they're suffering from depression, you'll often find what happens to them. Their beliefs, their core beliefs, start to become questionable to them, and they start to fall apart. And so well-being and certainty are very much interconnected with one another. And we need to, in order to have our certainty, we need to be looking at our well-being. It's very, very important. So our well-being is something that's very, very important to us in our life, as Muslims. And it was very much a focal point of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. We have another beautiful hadith here that, it's become a bit of an in-word, or it's even becoming cliched now. People talk about trauma, don't they? Like trauma-informed. Are you trauma-informed? And that's what my training is in trauma. I'm a trauma therapist. And so this is very much the focus of my work. Is in a classical, how do we understand trauma from a classical perspective? I mean, trauma is a very interesting word. In Greek, it means a wound. And in German, Traum, my German is not there, but I've heard it means a dream. It means dreaming. Which is very interesting, because we see trauma is a rupture in your psyche. It's like a wound. Something has entered into your psyche, your sense of being, that's broken your sense of boundaries of who you are and shakes your very fabric, and you have to heal that. It's like anything, it's like a cut. Trauma, you had something that happened in your life that shook you. And how do you recover from that? And what often happens with trauma is an incident or an event was so overwhelming for the individual that they disassociate. They drift off. You'll find this, some people report that when they had a traumatic event happen in their life where they were paralyzed by that event, that they literally project them as their own selves onto the wall, and they say, when I remember that event that happened to me, it's like I can see myself from down, like I'm looking down upon myself. And people who go into You know, anesthesia in the surgery, people report that, don't they? They say that I could actually see myself in the surgery room, like looking above. So trauma causes people to go into dreamlike states and disassociate. In Arabic, I'm not really aware of a word, people might be able to inform me, that's really talks about trauma in that way. From a traditional Islamic point, we talk about trials and tribulations, really. Like for example, we have the word fitna. Are people familiar with the word fitna? So fitna is a beautiful word because fitna means something that shakes your core or shakes the core of something and makes it disintegrate and then rebuilds at either at a higher level or just completely collapse. So fitna, one of the processes from this root fatana, is to take gold, a solid gold, and take it through the process where you extrapolate the pure gold from the actual raw mineral, material. And that's very much what trauma does, or any sort of adverse experiences. It ruptures you and then makes you need to explore that to grow. And when you do heal from that event, you actually become a more resilient and stronger person. And so the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, highlighted this in his tradition. He says, trials and tribulations are a fact of life. We're going to go through adverse experiences. And they'll be presented to hearts even as an interwoven mat is, bit by bit. So say you've got, a mat, some matting, some material, and you've got the what do you call it, the weft and the, what is it they call it? The two, someone educate me. You've got the weave and you know what I'm talking about anyway, don't you? So, those old classic, in Fez they have the old machines, in Pakistan they have them as well, isn't it? Where the guy's got the pedal and he's got the warp and the weave, I don't know. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's taking this, he's saying, this is really beautiful because he says, our psyche is like that, it's like fabric. And it has all these sorts of fabrics interwoven with one another. And then something comes into it to rupture that fabric. And that is the heart. And then these trials and tribulations enter upon the heart. And if we allow that to the material, which is our heart here, to absorb it and leave it there, it starts to taint it. And so what's upon us is when a trial, it comes through into our fabric, we have to see how we can allow it to pass through us to the other side. He says, any heart which rejects them, I can move through them, these trials. He will be able to be pure. And purity from an Islamic perspective of the heart is that you see things as they truly are. You're able to see things with clarity and integrate them into your experience. That's what I was speaking about at the beginning. Whilst if that you allow that stain, that trial that's come into and caused a rupture to linger, it means it starts to deform and your perspective of yourself and the world around you, and you don't see things with clarity. The result is that the heart will be of two kinds, one dark and rusty, and look at the metaphor he uses here, it's really beautiful. He says, like an overturned, I better finish this. So he's saying the heart's like this. And the heart, when it's open, it can receive. It's open to its circumstances and its environment. And so it lets things go through into it and pass through it, and it's able to integrate. But eventually, that happens. If someone doesn't allow that to happen, your cup becomes overturned and you close off to the world around you. And that's very much what happens to people when they become traumatized, is that they're so overwhelmed by the stimuli within themselves and out in the environment around them that they become like a closed glass that just can't let anything in. And then what happens, they're not able to recognize what's good and reject the evil. So their whole framework becomes distorted, and they become just overwhelmed. Whereas the other is white. It's not harmed by the trials as long as the heavens and earth endure. If they continue in that vein, they're able to deal with any trial and tribulation that comes to them and pass through. So this is very much how we look at trials in Islamic sense, is that what does it fundamentally affect? It can affect the heart. And the heart, from an Islamic perspective, is our core, our centre, whereby which we absorb the reality around us and understand things. And it's really important that we protect that faculty. Another very famous hadith that I think is really beautiful is clarifying the point that we, as you know, there's this common argument, isn't it, the nature-nurture argument, a very controversial topic, is like, from an Islamic perspective, we believe that the human being has an innate capacity within it to know what it needs. And so this is highlighted in this tradition where the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, says there's no newborn except they're born on a natural primordial disposition, which we call in Arabic a fitra. And fitra is a very interesting word. It means something that comes out of nothing and then grows. Like, we get the word mushroom from this. Because you think about the spores of the mushroom, they're like in the environment, you don't see them, and then suddenly they land on something and they grow from it. We also, if you're familiar, iftari. What do we do in Ramadan? We have iftar, don't we? Because you've had nothing, you've eaten nothing, and then you put food in your body, and then you grow from that. So fitra is basically this thing that's embedded in us, that's quite hidden, but it's looking to grow towards what it needs. And the hadith here is talking about sort of our sense of that innate within the human being is a desire to connect to oneness. And so he says, and then the parents raise them as a Jew, Christian, or Zoroastrian. Now, some people might look at this as controversial, like, what are they saying here? I find it's really beautiful, because what the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is highlighting is that we have innate needs within us, an urge, and fundamentally that urge is to connect to something that is beyond this creation that's one. And then society directs that in a certain direction. And from an Islamic understanding, we see as, why did he highlight these three? So here's the parent, and he sees the child and he has urges, and that parent will direct it towards what they feel is right for that child. And I wouldn't just take that from a theological perspective. Even though this is highlighting theologically, from an Islamic perspective, we believe that innate in the human being is a desire to connect to a one God that's not related to race, that's not related to that God is part of creation, because from a Christian perspective, obviously God came into the world and he became part of creation. And so the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is highlighting from an Islamic perspective that we understand that God is not part of this creation, he didn't come into it. And the Zoroastrian belief is very much is that these two polar opposites are always in clashing with one another, i.e. good and evil are like two major forces that are clashing with one another. Whilst from an Islamic perspective, we understand that even when we recognise good and evil in the world, fundamentally there's one God that's in control. But what I really want to highlight here from a psychological point is that, you know, the babies know what they need. So when a baby's hungry, it cries out to the parent, doesn't it? And the parent will take that energy and fulfill it for the child that's in a way that's conducive towards its health. So the mother will give milk to the baby. The baby's tired, and so the mother or the father or the caregiver will put the baby to sleep and let it rest or soothe it in order so it can sleep, because it can't do it itself, but it does know what it needs fundamentally. But then what happens as that baby grows and becomes a human, as a human being, as that child grows and matures, what happens often is the parents and society itself skews that energy towards a certain way, and sometimes that is not natural, is not actually it's not in accordance with what it really needs. Like, for example, I live amongst the Pakistani community, and so they're usually my example that I strike, is that child has certain innate urges they want to achieve. So in education, for example, they feel they're artistic and they want to go into the humanities. and so there's this energy, there's this urge towards achieving that, and they feel it in their core that this is the direction they want to go in life. And then their mum and dad say, Buddha, you are not going to be an artist, you're not going to make any money, you are going to become a doctor. So they take that energy, that urge towards something, and they skew it for what they want. Does that make sense? And you can take this in, when I'm sitting with a client in the room and working with them, they're talking to me, in their mannerisms, in their the emotions that turn up in the session, I'm looking, where do those energies want to go? Because fundamentally those energies want to assert themselves in the world, and they want agency. And what happens often, not just parents, not family, even society sometimes says no and stamps on that, and it makes that person feel like that energy, where's it going to go then? And if they're not fed those energies in a healthy way, they manifest in surreptitious ways, and they self-sabotage you. They sabotage where you want to go. So, for example, a classic stereotype that you'll see is and again I'm using an Asian example, do apologise, but there's the eldest sister or brother, they end up, because they've got a lot of siblings underneath them, they end up becoming like the parent for their younger siblings. There's a classic model here. And they lose out on their childhood because they feel that they had to look after others. And so when they become an adult, like, what often happens is, they didn't even choose the person that they wanted to marry. That's a classic situation in Asian community in places like Keele and Bradford, is that they didn't necessarily choose the person they wanted to marry. So everything was dictated to them. And so at around 30 or 40, they just have a breakdown because they feel like they've not been able to assert their own agency in their life. And this is where mental health shows up. And I really feel that this tradition alludes to this point, is that we have innate urges and needs and drives that we have to channel, and we have to sometimes curb to some degree so they're not chaotic, but we have to direct them towards something healthy they can attach to. Here's another tradition that I think is really beautiful in how the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, addressed situations where someone can go into dysfunction. So he says, be aware of God wherever you may be. So have a sense of this ultimate being, this absolute being in your life that you're trying to connect to. And obviously if you're walking around your day and you're trying to be aware of God in your life, you're going to be sometimes cautious, you don't want to do the wrong thing. And of course, at some point, you will end up doing something wrong. That's just the nature of life, is that we fall sometimes. But what happens when you fall? This is what's so beautiful about this tradition. It says, be aware of God wherever you may be. And if you slip, then basically, if you commit a shameful deed, and the word in Arabic is sayyi'ah. Sayyi'ah literally means something that makes your face drop. That's why I'm translating it as shameful. Now, what happens if you do something shameful? If you do something and you're disappointed in yourself, you sort of close off, don't you? You feel like this. And that can become compounded. And what happens to people is that they end up going into chronic shame. And chronic shame is like a shutdown response, whereby you don't want to you just want to run away from the world. You don't feel alive in yourself. And so the Prophet sort of addresses this issue. He says, whenever you do a shameful deed, what should you do? Follow it up with a beautiful one, a hasana. People translate it as a good deed, but hasan literally means something that's beautiful, that makes you open up to the world. Because beauty creates curiosity. If I'm sitting there depressed, and I'm such an idiot, I'm a loser, and then this beautiful, I've got to be careful with my examples here. This beautiful cat walks past, and I go, oh. What's happened? Can you see the physiological reaction? You're in a shutdown response, and then you recognise something that's quite beautiful, like you connect to. It makes you come out of that shutdown response, and you want to connect. And so the Prophet's addressing this issue. When we go into a shutdown response because of something we've done and we feel bad about it, don't mull over it, because that make it worse, and you'll just keep going wanting to shut down and feel bad about yourself. Rather, do something good in the world, do something beautiful in the world, and it brings you out of that shutdown response, and it actually makes you feel good about yourself. So this is a psychological approach to how to deal with chronic shame. It's quite beautiful. Is that make yourself feel like you're doing some, bringing goodness into the world, and it will make you feel good about yourself. And then he says, and this is the arena of personal development and working in yourself and exploring yourself, and deal with people with good character. Because it's in interacting with other people you really learn to grow and learn about yourself and be able to achieve your potential. You know, you can't be spiritual and hate people. You know, I love God. God, I love you. I just can't stand your creation. You know, it's like, you know, that typical stereotypical English guy living on the Costa del Sol. Say, love the Costa del Sol. Spain's brilliant, isn't it? But why can't all these people speak bloody English? You know, it's like you love the place, but you can't stand the actual inhabitants. And someone who's spiritual is engaged with the creation. And I believe this fundamentally from my own personal experiences. If you want to experience God, you have to experience what it's like to be. If you want to experience intimacy with God, you have to be intimate with another human being. If you've never experienced what it's like to connect to someone and fall in love with them and be intimate with them, then you'll never know what it's like to actually connect to God. It's through creation that we learn about God and we learn about ourselves. And I said mental health is all about connection to yourself and connection to others. And we are hurt and we are wounded in relationships, and we heal in relationships. And that's, if anyone's not married yet in this room, then just a forewarning for you is that the most intimate relationship you can ever have with a person is your mother and your father. They're the first real intimate relationships you have. And those sort of, and obviously our caregivers, God bless them, they never do a perfect job, and we never do a perfect job. So we're scarred sometimes in our relationships. And then we get married, and that's the second most intimate relationship. Those wounds that haven't been dealt with will manifest in our relationships with those people. And so and what often happens in relationships is people they can't deal with having to, you know, address those issues. They'd rather just blame the other person or blame the circumstances and run away from that. Where really, intimate relationships show us what are the issues we need to deal with. So I really believe that relationships is the arena to heal our deepest wounds. And, you know, we get to explore where the work is. So here's another, I think this is really profound as well. There's a famous Muslim scholar called Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and he mentions in one of his books about a man who was afflicted with something that was making his life very difficult. And if it were to prolong, it would affect his life detrimentally in this world and the next. He's tried every avenue to rid themselves of it, but to no avail in resisting and fighting it. Every time he resists and fights it, it only gets worse. What is the means to curing it? And Ibn Qayyim says something very interesting. He quotes a saying of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, saying, God did not reveal a disease, except that he has also revealed the cure for it. And so from an Islamic perspective, if we have something that's, you know, causing us problems in our life, God has placed a solution for it, and the Muslim is curious about where that can be found. He's not someone who limits himself. And there's a famous tradition related in Tirmidhi, where it's reported the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, said, everyone's familiar with it, I think, that wisdom is the lost possession of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he snatches it up. And so a believer is open to the world. He's not like, you know, closed off and saying, you know, this is the way we do things and we're not going to take from it all those gore and all those. No. Muslims wants to go into the world and be curious. Sorry, gore people aren't familiar. You know, white people. Don't know who they are. The Muslim goes out into the world to search for wisdom and search for solutions. And he doesn't look for some Islamic brand on it. You know, rather he's saying, what things can help me that's conducive to my religion and my principles in life, and if it works, it works. if it's in alignment with the principles. And so that brings us back to the first point I made in this talk, is that wild times or call for wild solutions, i.e. we don't live like the people of the past, and we live in very crazy times. And we have to adapt to that situation and look for what Allah has placed in our current climate that can remedy that. And most of the therapeutic modalities out there are conducive, but it's important for us to explore them as Muslims to see which ones we align, which ones we feel an affinity towards, and whether they are conducive to our faith. It's important to ask that question, but fundamentally it shouldn't stop us from going out and trying to find answers. And mental health is one that is the most important thing that we can address with, because our well-being is fundamental to our faith. And I believe a lot of the theological questions and misgivings and doubts that people bring to me have got nothing to do with theology. They're to do with problems in their life, and it's skewed their belief. So when someone comes to me and says, why did God create evil, for example? I say, what's going on in your life? No, I'm not going to go to some theological, I'm not going to discuss things theologically with him. I know deep down there's something that's troubling them, and often more than not, we explore those things therapeutically, and then someone's theologically fine. Most of the things we have theological struggles with is actually it's directing us towards something internal that we are struggling with emotionally with ourselves. And that our bodies and our souls and our minds, it has the capacity to heal, fundamentally. If someone cuts themselves, it heals itself, doesn't it? The body, it naturally works towards healing that wound. The doctor does not do the healing. The doctor may put a stitch in there to facilitate the healing, or he may put a cast around the wound to facilitate the healing, but it's just holding the space. Fundamentally, through Allah's power, through God's power, is that the body's healing. And so we have to just sometimes step back and allow the healing to happen. And I believe this is highlighted in this Quranic verse here, where God says He's given everything its creation, then guided it. I guided it towards its well-being. But I do believe, I've got about 10 minutes left, so I do believe that it's important to understand the principles. Like C.S. Lewis, he's got I love this quote. He says, what we learn from experience depends on the kind of philosophy we bring to experience. So the way we understand things will have an effect on the way we experience the world. And so it is fundamental we have a map. And that's why I am so passionate about, I believe religion is a huge blessing in people's lives, because it's a map that stood the test of time for many, many ages. And so it gives us some frameworks to work around. And the minute we start sort of tearing apart those things, that we can't deny, even if we have, for example, in society, in the English culture and society today, we have many people who are, for example, claim to be, they see themselves as atheists, but they can't deny centuries and centuries that within themselves are very much Christian concepts. They're within our society and the words we use and the way we look at the world. That's over 2,000 years of somewhat of that being in a culture. You can't just eradicate it. It's within you subconsciously, even if you don't admit it consciously. And so religion is something that's very much we have to wrestle with, and we have to very much face it and recognize that it's part of our life. And so I believe that if we can come to that harmony, because I had to do that. I was brought up in a Christian household, and I had to come to terms with religion again and my relationship with God again. And it's something that brings about great healing if we can do that. And it's very much important to the psyche of the human being. So this is like a map, an Islamic or map that's been offered by a man called Abdullah Rothman. Abdullah Rothman is he he's a convert to Islam. He's from a Jewish family and he's from America, but he's a psychotherapist in Abu Dhabi at the moment. And this is very much his research is on Islamic psychology. And so this is how we understand the soul from an Islamic perspective. So I'm just going to touch on it briefly because of time, you know. So these are actually Arabic terms, so some of you might not be familiar with them. I'm not interested in the three either side at the moment. I'm more interested in the core. Is that these are the four faculties within the human being that we have to work towards integrating. They are the ruh. And what do we usually translate ruh as? Now I don't translate it as soul.
Spirit.
Yeah, I prefer spirit, and I'll explain why. So we have the ruh, which is the spirit, and then we have the nafs. What do we translate that as usually? And get it out there. You know, what words have you heard it translated as? Yeah, ego. I have a real issue with that. My ego does not like that word. in this context, that's how we understand it. What other words have you heard for it? Huh? Desire. Yeah, that's problematic as well. It's not wrong. It's not completely wrong. We can look at that.
Self.
The self. Okay, interesting. Yeah. And soul. Now, when I'm using soul here, so I like for the nafs to use the word soul, and for ruh to use spirit. And when I use soul here, I mean your sense of self, who you are. So like, you know, you said self there. It like really nafs. This is really hard when we compartmentalise things. When we compartmentalise things, we always take things in a certain direction. Even the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings upon him, he sort of did this in a way. You know, he said Islam is three, didn't he? Islam is three. What are they? It's like being back at madrasa in there. Islam. You'll fail. Iman and Ihsan. Are you familiar with the tradition of Gabriel? So he says Islam's three, and one of them is Islam. You think, hey, what are you talking about? How can it be? Islam's the category, and the subcategory is Islam's a subcategory as well. It's because when you compartmentalise, you're obviously going to take things in a certain direction. And so Islam as a whole divides into three. Islam, which is the outward actions, obviously your testification of faith. I declare that I believe in there's no deity worthy of worship but God, and that Muhammad is final and last messenger, and they're performing that's the shahada, performing the prayer, and then doing. I'm going to do pantomime on you if you're not careful. Okay, I can't hear you. What's the third one? Zakat, then fasting, Ramadan, and then performing the Hajj. These are outward acts, aren't they? Then we've got, what's the next one? Iman. So Iman is our beliefs. It's the cognitive. So Islam is the physical. Iman is our cognitive processing. We believe in God. Amantu billahi kama huwa amantu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusul. You're getting trauma of ustad you with a stick in front of you as I say this. Well, kutubi. It's so funny. You memorise these things and then you ask people to translate them. So I don't know. It says these are your tenets of faith. You don't even know how to translate them. So I believe in God and His angels and His books, the scriptures, blah 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 blah, isn't it? And then ihsan is to actually embody those two, to integrate them into experience, to worship God as if you see Him, and know if you don't see Him, you can't experience that. Know that He sees you. So the nafs really is all of it, which is strange. But now we're compartmentalised. The nafs is your sense of self. But what I like to even look at it is it's like your body, who you are physically. And then we have the ruh. So we have to integrate these two things. My body needs things. It needs to eat. It needs to sleep. It needs to gratify its sexual appetites. Its food. Its appetites for food, and so forth and so forth. We have to listen to the body. We can't neglect it. And the ruh, the spirit, it wants to connect to something far higher than the body. It wants to sort of connect to everyone around it and connect to God Himself. And we have to balance those two things. We can't say the ruh's good and the nafs is bad. They're both as fundamental to one another. And even the ruh can go out of whack. The spirit can go out of whack. And the proof I use for this is there's a tradition where one of the companions of the Prophet, peace and blessing upon him, called Salman al-Farisi. He was a Persian. He was called Salman. He went to visit his brother in religion, who was called Abu Darda. And when he visited him, Abu Darda was a proper ascetic. He was hardcore. And so Salman went to his house, and and Abu Darda put food on his plate. He put food before him. And he started eating. He says, "Aren't you going to eat with me?" He says, "No, I'm fasting." And then later on, they were going to go to bed. And he makes a bed for him. He says, "Sit in the bed, here's your bed. Made it for you, sleep." He says, "What about you? Are you sleeping?" He went, "No, I'm going to spend the night in prayer." And then in the morning, Salman saw his Abu Darda's wife, and she looked dishevelled. And he said, "Why are you in this state? What's wrong with you?" She went, "Oh, my husband's got no need of me. He's neglecting me and all sorts." And so Salman got really troubled by this. He said, "Abu Darda, what are you doing? This isn't the way of spirituality." And Abu Darda, if my memory serves me correctly, he gets vexed and he goes to the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessing, and he says, "This guy won't get off my case. I'm doing my spirituality. He's ruining it." And the Prophet said, "What did he say?" And he said, "Such and such and such." He went, "No, he's right." He says, "Your eye has a right over you. I sleep." He says, "Your body has a right over you. Your family have a right over you. You've got to integrate these two things." And so usually the nafs, the whatever you want to call it, gets a bad rap, I think. It does have to be curtailed in it. The nafs is like a child in that it needs to be nurtured, but it also needs to be controlled. So those urges we have within us, we need to listen to them and work with them, but we can't let them just go crazy. We can't eat 20 Twix bars in a day. We've got an urge to eat. We've got to channel that in a healthy way. And so, how do we integrate the ruh and the nafs? Is through the qalb and the aql. And the qalb, from an Islamic point of view, which we translate usually as qalb, is what? The heart. The heart, from an Islamic perspective, and in the Quranic usage, is the faculty within us that can assess things. It turns things over. Now, there is another wing. Is the usage of the qalb is that it wants one thing one day and then the other. It can change in terms of its desires. But the Quranic usage is not used like that. It's used to assess things. So here's a mobile phone, and I start assessing it from all angles. So when something comes into your heart, do I want to do this or not? It assesses it. It looks at them. And the purer the heart, the clearer the heart, the easier it is to see things as they are, the reality of things. And then the aql is what usually is translated as what? Do you know? Intellect. Yeah? That's an interesting topic. You said mind, didn't you? Yeah, it's an interesting one. Because of the ancients, there's a book called The Soul Machine. And they talk about how with the Enlightenment period, they stopped using the word soul and changed it to mind. Which is very interesting. But the aql means literally to restrain something, to hinder it. And so for us, intellect is not reason necessarily. That's one aspect of it. But the aql is far bigger than that. It's the capacity for us the heart is to know what's right and wrong, and the aql is the ability to actually carry it out. So I know that when I go home tonight, and I'm probably going to be knackered from getting off the train, the worst thing I can do is probably stay up all night and watch Netflix. But I'm tired, I just want a downtime. And then I watch one episode of Ortugul, and then I'm like, oh God, I can't leave you on that cliffhanger, I've got to watch the next one and the next one. But my heart says, you shouldn't be doing this, isn't good. But my aql, my intellect, or this restraining capacity, it can't do it. Oh, it's another one. So the aql is the actual practical application of being able to bring what the heart knows into action. Does that make sense? It's like that resilience and ability. So that's the way. This is some aspects of how we understand the self from an Islamic point of view. Now, I know time's very short. I did want to bring some practical things in for us, though. And so, the next slide, please. So, let's bring this down to a practical level. What I want you to take away from some practical points today is, how do we understand ourselves? In the work I do, fundamentally we look at the nervous system. And the nervous system is a hierarchical system that moves and shifts between different states. The first state, and this is a theory, it's called polyvagal theory, that's been proposed by Stephen Porges, but it's used by many, many people in the therapeutic world because it actually works, is that we have the first state we call ventral vagal. Ventral vagal is when you feel calm in yourself. You're sitting in this lecture theatre and you're engaged, you're just taking in the information I'm saying and you're going, yeah, I'm feeling it. And you're feeling alive and connected to what's being shared. And then at some points, obviously, because I'm talking for an hour, what's going to happen to your thoughts, your mind? You're going to start going, I wonder what I'm going to do after this. And you go somewhere, don't you? Or you just go numb and just go a bit. Or you may go, can the guy just shut up? I just want to, he said he's going to finish at 8 o'clock and it's past 8 o'clock now. I just want to get out of here. Now, halfway through this talk, you might have been engaged with me. That's when you're in ventral vagal. You're feeling quite engaged and you're enjoying it. And then after a while, you start to get a bit irritated. Oh, I'm sitting in a chair, I'm sitting on my backside for half an hour. Oh, this is too much, I want to do something. You move into what we call sympathetic adrenal, which means you're activated. And they usually call that fight and flight, don't they? Is everyone familiar with that term, fight and flight? But it's not just fight and flight, it's just you're activated and you just, I just want to get something done, or I just want to get out of here, or engage with something, I want to do something. And then the last part of the nervous system is what we call dorsal vagal, which is called a freeze-collapse response. So that's where basically the activations become so much and you've not been able to use it, or it's just overwhelmed you that you just go into a numb state. So daydreaming is actually a mild manifestation of a dorsal vagal shutdown response, is you just go off somewhere. An extreme of that would be fainting, or someone having a seizure and just collapsing. So our nervous system, it's been designed to move through one of these states fluidly. So sometimes I need to be in a relaxed state. If I'm sitting with you guys and chilling out, I should be in a ventral vagal state, connecting. And then if there's a fire if the fire alarm goes off, we're required to go into what state now? Which one? Sympathetic. And then if you've had to slog it out, you had to work at you had to help out at your cousin's wedding, and you were non-stop running around feeding people, for example. After that, you're going to be in what state? The dorsal vagal shutdown. You need to spend some time to relax and then you'll come out and you feel better and you're ready to engage with the world again. Does that make sense? The problem is that a lot of people's nervous systems, due to their upbringing, i.e. their parents weren't able to teach them how to regulate properly through their interactions, or through traumatic events that happen in their life, they're not able to move fluidly through these states. So when they get activated, they get stuck in activation and they can't move out. So even when the environment around them is safe and there's no problems, they get agitated. And so what happens to those people often is they go from sympathetic, and then the sympathetic energy becomes too much for them, so they go into shutdown. And then they struggle to come out of a shutdown response, which is depression. What we see as depression, from a neurobiological perspective, is a dorsal vagal shutdown response. That's all it is. And then what happens is, when someone's in a dorsal vagal shutdown, they need to come out in order to engage again. And what often happens for those people is, when they come out of a dorsal vagal shutdown, they experience that energy again, but it feels too activating, and they go back into shutdown. Does that make sense? I don't know if any of you can relate to this and they've experienced this. Like people that suffer from anxiety generally suffer from depression as well, because you go between these two states. Anxiety is overstimulation of the sympathetic adrenal, and depression is a dorsal vagal shutdown response. And people struggle to come out of these states. And so these states are expressed in the way even we speak. If someone says to me today, it's too much. This information's just too much for me. You've overwhelmed me. Which state are they in? Dorsal vagal shutdown. So listen to the way you speak and people speak, and you can detect which. You can start diagnosing them. Your friends say, "Oh, you happen to be in a dorsal vagal shutdown response." And if someone's like, for example, says, "Oh God, I just want to, I want to smack him in the face. Why won't he shut up?" Which state are they in? Sympathetic. And what often happens in a session, in therapy, someone will say at the end of the session, "You know what, it's not as bad as I made it out to be. I think I was making a bit too much of it. I actually feel all right now." Which state are they in? They're in ventral vagal. So my thing is, analyse in your day, check in, where are you in your nervous system? And if you're in sympathetic, or if you're in dorsal vagal shutdown, that is where you have to tend to yourself. And the way I want to look at you, to look at your nervous systems, is like this little baby here that you got. You know, that little thing you take so much care of, give so much attention. If this phone suddenly shows 20%, what should you do? What would you do? When do you start charging your mobile phone? What percentage is your phone on? Because this will tell you how you treat your nervous system. Who waits until 1%? Oi! Tells me a lot about you. Who has to have it 100% all the time? Oh, you're on top of things. That might be a bit OCD-ish, but... But so say I start feeling sympathetic activation, that means I need to slow things down. Now, some people might say, oh, I've only got 20% left. Let's use it as much as I possibly can. And what that's going to do is your phone's going to go into a dorsal vagal shutdown. Does that make sense? So when your nervous system, I want you to look at your nervous system like battery life. Check in, where are you? Oh, it's been a long day, 20%, I think. So now you have to, but I've still got so much more to do. And how do you bring it out of sympathetic or shutdown? You have to think about those things that you really connect to in your life. There's different ways we could bring out. Fundamentally, the way we bring ourselves out of activation or shutdown is we can tend to ourselves, and that's through mindful practices, you know, or not just mindful practices. It could be walking around the park, isn't it? You go outside and you just walk and you connect to nature, or you go to an art gallery if that's your thing. You know, and you observe, because what you're doing is you're going out of yourself and being curious in all those activities, or you're being curious about your own inner processing, and it brings someone out of a shutdown response or brings them out of activation. So you have to ask, what are your resources in your life? What things do you do that make you feel like, a bit better about yourself? That could be connecting to someone that you really feel understands you. It could be doing artwork. It could be music. It could be nature walks, it could be anything. And usually it's things that, if you look back in your childhood, things that you connected to as a child, you know, things that you really like to do. So for example, I'll give you an example. I used to love climbing. I love the gym rope. I don't know what it was about the gym rope, but I like climbing it. So what I do now is, and you know what happens as an adult, you say, well, that's so childish, I'm not going to do anything like that anymore. So what I do is I do those indoor wall climbing things. So I connect to something that I really connected to as a child in those, you know, those times when you were free, no worries in the world. You know, and sometimes all I need to do is I come out of Keele and go up to the Salt and Pepper, which is this scenic part, and I look down on Keele and it looks so small. And I just say, oh, you're not such a big deal anymore, you know. That's what we do in our little towns in Yorkshire. So it's just something where you can look at something from a bigger perspective. Does that make sense? And check in on your nervous system, how's it feeling? Because your body's going to speak to you and tell you where your nervous system's at. I can tell where people are at just by handshakes. I can tell when someone's in sympathetic. If they're in sympathetic, they have maybe clammy hands, hot. If they've got really bad cold circulation, you can check the next person next to you. You can check where they're in there, which part of the nervous system. You know, some people complain about poor circulation, don't they? They say, I'm always feeling cold. Yeah? I won't ask who's like that. That's because what happens when you go into a dorsal vagal shutdown response, or even sympathetic, the heat in your body goes to the major organs to keep them safe. And then when you feel safe and you can relax, that heat starts to disperse through your body again. Does that make sense? So people, once they feel relaxed, they start feeling their face warms up and they feel a bit more comfortable. They feel their hands are nice and warm, and even their feet feel like warmth going to their feet. That's someone coming out of either a sympathetic or a dorsal vagal shutdown. You'll find a really good technique. When you go into a sympathetic or dorsal vagal shutdown, you become hypervigilant. You start you can't see the bigger picture. So a very simple technique. And mobile phones naturally put us into sympathetic state because we're like this. It makes your focus narrow and it puts you into a hypervigilant state. So a little exercise you can do is you get your fingers like this and you try to hold them in the same, in your vision at one time. and it forces you just to pan out. And you know, what often happens when you do this, you get to the point where I cannot see my fingers anymore, so I'm about there, I can still see them, is that a breath comes up. You go like this, and what that is your nervous system coming out of a sympathetic or a shutdown response. Another classic one is breath work. Now you have to be careful with breath work though, because breath work can actually cause more anxiety for some people. But one breath technique you can do is you breathe in 4, hold for 7, and release 8 very slowly, because the exhalation puts you into a parasympathetic state, a rest and digest state, whilst inhalation puts you into a sympathetic state. So people who are stressed, they go to shallow breathing, don't they? So your breath is telling you where you're at in your nervous system. And so a way to get out of that, but it's got to be gentle. It can't be like, I'm stressed, I'm going to do a breathing exercise, here we go. That's not gonna. You've got to have a soft attitude around it. So you basically first of all relax, orient in your room, and just check out things that you feel comfortable. This is another thing: is moving of the neck in a relaxing fashion and looking round, because it makes the body just let go of its defences, and then you go. And if you do it, I can actually feel my body reacting to it. It's like it starts to just go, I can feel like energy go through my legs. And so these are some simple interventions that you can use to move yourself out of a sympathetic or dorsal vagal shutdown. And one of the key things to know where you're at in your nervous system is through the realm of sensations. So if you're in a sympathetic state, stressed state, or you're in a shutdown response, it will show up in your body through constriction. So sensations like feeling numb, disconnected, stiff, knotted, achy, hollow, tight, heavy, cold, itchy, dizzy. These are sensations. Pay attention to your sensations in your body and note what that indicates. Where are you in your nervous system? And if you want to move to a ventral vagal state, to expansion, these are some of the sensations that you would experience in your body. So say someone's got a stiff neck. What happens to me when I get a bit stressed? I can feel tension in my shoulders. Do you get that? So you start to feel tension, just relax, you sit back in a chair and you say, can I notice my feet on the floor? What do my feet feel like? Well, I've got tension here. Okay, no problem, you got tension there. But in your feet, oh no, my feet don't feel tense, they feel quite relaxed. Okay, bring your attention there. So you bring attention to where in your body you actually feel a bit of relaxation or no pain. And you bring your attention to that, and then when you come back to this, you'll note that it might have gone down a notch. So you score it, you say my shoulders feel like a 6, 10 being the most intense. My feet, they feel quite comfortable actually, and I'll give them probably about a 6. Okay, I'm going to spend about 10 seconds, 20 seconds just being with that, my feet, and then come back to the shoulders, and you might think that, the pain is still there. Yeah, it's still there, fair dues, but it's not as intense. It's gone down to maybe a 5 or a 4. And this pendulation, we call it in the body, is where you're moving between sensations of expansion and constriction. They start to sort of communicate with one another, and they sort of balance one another out. And this is how we create regulation in the body. So this is based upon the work that I do, somatic experiencing, and I feel that it's a very organic way of touching into the body, and it moves away from pathologizing things to say I'm a depressed person or I'm an anxious person. No, you're in a depressed state, you're in a shutdown state, or you're in a sympathetic state. How do you move out of that? And as you start to develop new habits of moving out of that, they become sort of the track marks that you move towards. And because we know now of the neuroplasticity of the body, that as we develop new habits, it develops. As we try new things, it develops new habits, and they become something that we can incorporate and integrate into our life.